Hi, I'm Jared. I'm from Wichita. What constitutes a dead virus? Because I've always been told that viruses are just chunks of DNA in a package.
That is a very old school way of looking at viruses that I actually get on the evolutionary biologists a lot about. They ignored viruses for a very long time because they think, oh, they're just degraded, bacteria or something. I would say that much like on the abortion issue, there is a continuum of life. It doesn't start at conception. It doesn't start with ribosomes. So when I say a dead virus, I mean a non-infectious virus. And there are any number of ways of rendering a virus non-infectious. You can treat it with certain chemicals. You can expose it to UV light. There's various things we can do to make sure that what we're injecting someone with, if it's a dead virus, we make sure it's a dead virus. Because there are some people with lupus and various autoimmune diseases that cannot have live viruses. So if we injected them with a dead virus that was still infectious, we'd get a lot of trouble.
I just wanted two questions. One is, are there any examples recently of diseases popping up that should not have because of people not using vaccines? And then the second part of that would be how that relates to herd immunity, and if you could expand on the importance of herd immunity.
So, yes, the United States has been having a lot of trouble with measles. Measles is extremely infectious to the point where if there was someone sitting in the middle of this room with measles, we would all be exposed. Every single one of us would be at risk of contracting the disease. And so I believe they just released a report yesterday that last year the United States had the most cases of measles that we've had in ages and ages, is over 200. A really recent example of this as well is that, I'm going to go off on a rant. The people who don't vaccinate their kids, I really have from them a very arrogant, upper class, they have no idea the way the rest of the world lives. The rest of the world wishes that they had access to the kinds of vaccines that we have access to. But these are the kinds of people who not only don't vaccinate their children, they take them on these wonderful overseas vacations that probably most of us can't afford. And so these kids are not only not vaccinated, they travel to these countries that don't have access to the vaccines that we have, so the diseases that measles, I've never seen measles, that's endemic in other parts of the world, meaning lots of people still get it. And then these kids come home and infect everybody else, just individuals who are either not immunized as well, or those of us in the population who got the MMR vaccine, but we're underprotected and we just don't know. And actually the Super Bowl this year, I think it was like 3 of these damn kids went to Super Bowl. And you're like, are you kidding me? There are so many people there. And we're lucky that I think there were only like 20 cases ultimately starting from those 3 unvaccinated people, and that it wasn't more widespread. But if people don't get their vaccines, it's just going to be worse. And I think it's almost going to take it getting much worse. It's going to take a pregnant woman losing her baby and suing the people who didn't vaccinate. It's going to take something major to really wake people up, I think, and to make sure that herd immunity goes back up.
Could you comment on the anamnestic response?
The anamnestic response? Anamnestic? I don't know that word. Oh, memory.
When the immune system learns to recognize a particular antigen, we sometimes, years later,
forget.
To see if they've made antibodies to it, if it was quote-unquote successful, and we find that there are no detectable antibodies. Yet they are protected.
Oh, well, I don't know about them still being protected if there are no antibodies. I know sometimes we aren't real sure how a vaccine works. For instance, the HPV vaccine is remarkably effective at reducing incidences of cervical cancer. However, that protection is not correlated with antibodies or the T-cell response, so we aren't real sure how that works. As far as your immune system forgetting,
Actually, it doesn't. Okay, that's the thing. It's no longer actively making antibodies in the absence of any antigen, but the first antigen to pop in
Yes.
years later,
Yes.
and bang, it's in full production mode again.
Yes, absolutely. So those light blue cells that were making the light blue antibody, after your infection's gone, most of those guys disappear. However, there's always just a handful that hang around, and the second that they see the pathogen that created them, they just go nuts, like he said. They start replicating again, they start producing a ton of antibodies, to the point where you might be exposed to that pathogen a second time, and you don't even know it. Like, you don't really get sick or get a fever like you did the first time, because your immune system keeps things in control, so you don't even have to think about it or worry about it.
Hi, JR from Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
Kind of a follow-up to what he said. Let's talk about the importance of boosters in adults.
Oh, sure. So one of the problems with vaccines is that you don't make the best antibodies you can make. And really the best ones you make are from a real infection. However, again, with a real infection, you actually have to get sick and deal with the side effects of that disease. And so one of the problems with vaccines is that because you don't get such a good response, sometimes your B cells and T cells, they don't stick around for as long. And so that's why, you have to get a booster shot and kind of remind your immune system, you've seen this before, don't forget about it. Like for tetanus toxin, for instance, every 10 years or so. Or in the case of chickenpox. Everyone out there who, I'm not sure what the age range is, but if you're old enough to be able to receive the shingles vaccine, which is basically the chickenpox vaccine, absolutely you should do it. Because chickenpox, whether you are infected with it naturally or through the vaccine, it can reactivate. And in adults, the disease is very different than the disease in children. So if you remind your immune system that you had chickenpox, you know what this is, then it can be on top of shingles whenever it tries to rear its head.
I'm Terry McKibben. I'm from Colorado.
Cool.
I appreciate your scientific knowledge and your presentation. It's well done. I, as one of the people listening from the audience that appreciates science to a great extent and what it's done to help humanity, I'm very grateful for what you're doing. At the same time, I want to comment and maybe open up the discussion a slightly bit more in that perhaps some of the fears that are out there and that keeps people from pursuing, solid, good science where there's a humanitarian effort to prevent these diseases. A world in which biological warfare is very well known, and in fact, we well know that our own government has indulged in developing biological weaponry. To what extent do you think this is a political matter more than a scientific matter?
I would say it's both, but it can be overhyped on the political side of it. For instance, very recently, there were some scientists in Europe who figured out how to make bird flu transmissible from person to person. So, it's kind of a long story, but you know how there's bird flu and there's swine flu and there's people flu? Well, the reason why, there are many reasons why that occurs, but one of those is that birds have different sugars on their proteins than humans do. And the bird flu likes the bird sugar, and human flu likes the human sugar. Well, in places like Southeast Asia, where people are living with their livestock and really almost extreme poverty, we've seen that bird flu can infect humans, and these humans have about a 50% death rate. Half of the people who get infected with bird flu die. On the bright side, bird flu, while it can transmit from a bird to a human, can't go from human to human. So what some scientists did was figure out what would it take to turn this bird flu into a bird flu/people flu. And so they wanted to publish this research because inevitably nature is going to figure out how to do this, and we need to be prepared because this is a kind of flu humans have never seen before. The US government shut that down. They were ready to publish, everything was ready to go, and the US government said, no, you can't publish this because terrorists are going to use bird flu as a weapon. That was fantastically stupid on so many levels. First of all, the reason why bird flu has such a high death rate in humans is not well known. And the fact that the individuals who had died of it are living in extreme poverty without access to even basic nutrition and basic health care, much less the kinds of hospitals we have access to here in the US, it might be more of a health care issue than it's an actual viral issue. And to say that we can't research this virus that will develop in nature, nature will do this, because terrorists might also do it, even though terrorists have already any number of extremely pathogenic viruses they could use as weapons if they wanted to. But now they're saying that, oh no, they might build a lab and, genetically modify this. I mean, why not use the virus you already have? Why not use bombs that have already worked? Why not hijack airplanes and fly them into buildings like they've already done? And on top of it all, this virus, the problem with using viruses to attack other humans is that you're also susceptible. A few cases like, for instance, smallpox, we've got really good vaccines, but we don't have a good vaccine for flu. I mean, we all know you have to get a new shot every single year. And so someone's going to release this flu into nature and hope that the vaccine they made will protect them years from now? No way. It's stupid. But ultimately, the U.S. government said, oh, well, yeah, you can go ahead and publish some of it. But yes, some of what we do in virology, some of what we do in vaccine research is affected by politics, either in positive or negative ways. I mean, I know the anthrax people are thrilled that they get so much money from the Department of Defense to figure out an anthrax vaccine, even though in nature it's not that big of a deal. Yeah.
Brad Erickson, Kearney, Nebraska. Along the lines that we were just discussing, politics and this issue, I can't leave out Governor Perry.
Yeah.
Because in 2007, and you're probably aware of the story, in 2007, he got lobbied, imagine that, to ensure that all young girls 11 and older, I believe, were vaccinated with HPV vaccine. All right, way to go, Governor. Okay, but along comes 2011, and now suddenly Governor Perry is running for president, and he changes his mind. You want to fill in the rest?
Well, yeah, I think in this particular instance, it's kind of the heartless nature of fundamentalist Christianity, in that, you would rather have your daughter be at risk of dying than giving your daughter a series of vaccines that, I mean, come on, when we were little and we got the little sugar cube with the oral polio vaccine on it, we had no freaking clue what was going on. You can vaccinate your child against a sexually transmitted disease and never talk about sex if you are that repressed. But that wasn't enough. It's like to seriously tell your daughter that remain a virgin or else. And even if it's or else, you don't know that the man she ultimately ends up marrying won't expose her to this virus. And then you run the risk of her thinking, oh, I was a good virgin, and, now I'm safe with this one man, so she might not go get her normal pap smears and look for cervical cancer. I mean, they're, once again, stupid. There are a whole host of issues here that really highlight that religion and morality are two entirely different things. That's all I can really say about that.
I know several people who they have absolutely no problem with getting their children their normal childhood vaccines that most schools and that require. However, at the same time, they're still very, very paranoid and wary of flu vaccinations. I was wondering if you had an opinion as to why that might be.
I think flu vaccinations are obnoxious because you have to get them every year. I know a very high-up influenza researcher who has never gotten a flu shot. There are several issues. One is people have the thing, oh, I got the shot and I still got sick, so what's the point in me ever getting the shot? Well, there's lots of different kinds of influenza. There's lots of different kinds of diseases that go around in cold and flu season that aren't flu, but people call them the flu. I have had the flu before. You feel like you're going to die. That's not just a cold. It's not just feeling slow one day. And so I personally get the flu shot every other year because they don't really change the formulation every single year. So I'm like, $20 every other year, I'll do it. But I've gotten the flu a couple times before, and it's just hell. I think the other issue some people have is that they get the flu shot and then they feel like crap the next day or two. And they're like, I don't want to go through this again. However, I would say that if you do feel like crap the day after you get a vaccine, that's actually a pretty good sign, because to bring up, once again, the randomness of your immune system might ignore that shot. But if you've got a little fever, if you've got a little runny nose, that means your immune system is responding to the vaccine, so it's actually a good sign. You should actually be pumped if you feel like just a little bit like crap at the flu shot. And then there's the issue, like if you're old enough to remember, we had this influenza crisis in the 70s where we thought, this big epidemic was coming, and a whole bunch of people got, I can't pronounce it right, Guillain-Barré syndrome. Guillain-Barré, thank you, sir. And there was never any really firm connection between the vaccine and the people developing that syndrome, and the people who got that syndrome eventually got better, but it kind of left a sour impression in people's minds. So now when they think flu shot, they think, they just have this negative response to it. However, I would say that if you're a parent of young infants, if you're someone who's caring for older relatives, absolutely, please get your flu shot, because you might be a relatively healthy, 20, 30, 40-year-old, but they aren't. And they don't have, they might not respond the same way to the flu as you would. So don't get the flu shot for yourself, get it for them. Okay, if that's it, then I will pass things off to Sean again.
I know
He had a question.
People have been familiar with the flu snort that they started doing. I did that once. I was like, cool, I don't have to have a shot. And I did that, and I felt like death. My head was going to explode.
Yeah.
3 hours, I wanted to kill myself, and I'm like, never again, give me the shot.
Yeah, so actually it depends on the vaccine, but the snort is a weakened virus. So that's probably why you felt like crap, is because you still had a little infection your body had to deal with, whereas the shot is dead virus, which means theoretically you made a better immune response to that than the dead guy. But like I said before, there are some people who cannot get a live vaccine because they have compromised immune systems, and so there's no guarantee that shot snort that's nothing for Sean won't lead to a huge episode in that individual with, say, lupus or something. But that's the difference. But a normal person, pick whichever one's cheapest.
You doing any other talks soon?
I am actually doing a talk soon at Free OK. What is it? July? What are those dates again? June 23rd. And actually there I'm going to be talking about how I learned to quit fearing viruses and really accept the kind of technology that we can get from these guys. And there's one more fellow with his hand up back there, I see.
Are all flu shots created equal? Like, is a free one the same as getting a $20 one the same as getting...
Yeah, anti-vaxxers are all about, oh, it's all about the money, it's all about the money. There's no money in vaccines. And so what happens is that there's no companies that want to produce vaccines. And so we really only have suppliers in like India and some people in Europe. So all those shots are produced really in the same locations at this point. Oh, there are more?
More questions?
Oh, we've got time. We'll keep going.
You said, like, if you had a response to the vaccine, it will be a mild response. But, like, if you give the 3 vaccines and you had 3 mild responses, is that possible? Then,
Well, you just have the mild response. However,
but if you had 3 combined,
it shouldn't be any different. However, there are some kids, and some parents might have even witnessed this, is that this mild response turns into a little more and they have a high-grade fever. Instead of just a little fever, they get a pretty bad fever. And those kids might have a seizure from the fever. Terrifying to parents, absolutely terrifying. But as a scientist looking at that, I'm like, well, they made an antibody response, it's fine. The seizure did no long-term damage, they made antibodies, they're protected from the disease. It's a side effect that happens, but it's better than that child dying from a future disease. However, it is something that scares parents, and obviously so. But I think maybe we need to communicate to parents the difference between a side effect and whether, you know, a vaccine was effective or not is really the goal of a scientist, whereas a parent is making sure their kid is as comfortable as possible. Let me make that.
I was wondering if you mentioned about vaccinating your children for the flu, like what age would be the best time to start?
I'm not sure what age. If you go to the CDC's website, they'll be able to tell you what ages are recommended for each vaccine and like when you should start vaccinating every year, or when you should look into getting a shingles booster and that sort of thing. I'm not 100% sure on that. But again, I think the age difference might have to do is when you can get the shot and when you can get the snort are different, because the live virus, I think they want the child to be a little older, but they might be able to get the shot when they're a little younger. But I would say look that up because I'm not real sure. Yeah.
Sorry. So if somebody does have a bad reaction to a vaccination and they have a seizure or something, wouldn't that be better than if they have a live actual virus? Wouldn't they have kind of much worse reaction than?
Probably. I mean that's always been my logic too. Is like if you have that kind of reaction to something that's dead, or if you have that reaction to something that's weak, you are asking for a lot worse if you're actually exposed to the pathogen. In the absence of someone having a reaction to, for instance, egg, and they're allergic to eggs, and they didn't know it until they got a vaccine. Or allergic reaction is a little different than the kind of response I was speaking about with him.
Talk a little bit about like the process you go through as researchers to discovering a vaccine?
Yeah, so one of the problems with vaccines that I really run up against as an HIV researcher is that I can't force you to make that light blue antibody. And everyone here is going to make a light blue antibody, but just a little different way. Because the way your immune system evolves is random, chance here. The only, not the selective pressure is the same, but the randomness behind it means everybody is going to have a different answer. Which means that as an HIV researcher, it becomes very difficult to get people to make antibodies that actually protect them against the virus. And so with HIV, we have tried absolutely everything and anything. Putting that in vaccines. We've tried just putting in proteins. We've tried putting in dead viruses. We cannot put in weakened viruses, which we've tried in primates. So if you take out one of the genes of HIV, it becomes really, it reduces its replicative capacity. And so we thought maybe if we put this virus in a vaccine, your body can overtake it and you'll be fine. But what we actually found was that the chimpanzees that got this vaccine, or maybe it was macaques, they ultimately developed AIDS from that. Because here's another layer of problem we run up against, is that it's not just the randomness of your immune response, the pathogens change too. So I didn't really talk much about that, but that's why we have to get a new flu shot every year, is that our antibodies are dealing with the virus we have this year, but then the virus changes. And next year, you have to deal with that virus again and again and again. And so with HIV, it's, we've at this point, almost resorted to gene therapy. So we take cells out of people, we genetically modify them to make the right antibody, we put that back into the individual, and we're currently pursuing that avenue. Yeah.
So what makes it so different from many of the viruses that we do have vaccines?
HIV is a retrovirus, so we carry our genome as DNA. HIV carries its genome as RNA, and then turns